Good morning from Wiesbaden, Germany. My name is Billy Reinstatler, and this morning I'll be talking to you about the wars of German unification during the 19th century. During the 19th century, Germany sought, or Prussia rather, sought hegemony over other German states. This resulted in a series of three wars: the 1864 Prusso-Danish War, 1866 Austro-Prussian War, and 1870 to 71 Franco-Prussian War. And this is the last one. This last one is what I'll be focusing on, using resources or articles from JSTOR, which is a phenomenal resource that I've used throughout my academic career as an undergraduate through my master's program, and I continue to use here at Liberty University. And so I'm going to approach it today from the topic of how civilians were treated during the Franco-Prussian War. I found three articles that discuss that. The first of these is actually a chapter in a book by Peter M.R. Sturck, and the book is titled A History of Military Occupation from 1792 to 1914. In his chapter of the Franco-German War and Occupation of France, he uses a mix of primary and secondary French and Prussian sources to argue that Otto von Bismarck and Prussia really did not want a lengthy occupation, and they were ill prepared for it. They wanted a negotiated settlement which gave them territory, namely Alsace-Lorraine, and that there was a diversity in how Prussian soldiers dealt in the occupied territories with French civilians, some treating them well and others being very harsh. But really he highlights that the Prussian administration, despite its renowned general staff system and its army, was ill prepared for a lengthy occupation administration, is what he concludes. Another article I found by Daniela Cagliotti outlines how the French dealt with German citizens or Prussian citizens. It's titled Waging War on Civilians, the Expulsion of Aliens in the Franco-Prussian War. And in it, she argues that, or she outlines rather, the French deportation of over 40,000 German or Prussian citizens from Paris and the surrounding department, which was a common practice during the 19th century. She argues that this is an instance of the states trying to balance individual liberty and national security, and that this was a turning point. The Franco-Prussian War was a turning point in how policies dealing with civilians. To do this, she focuses on French and German primary sources, but also makes comparisons to the U.S. Civil War, drawing on primary and secondary sources for that conflict. She talks about the 1864 Geneva Convention and its impact on the treatment of civilians during the war. And she also talks, interestingly, about the Prussian insistence on conscription in occupied territories such as Alsace and Lorraine. And she makes a comparison that, she makes the comparison that the treatment of the French in Alsace-Lorraine was equivalent to how the French expelled German citizens. So just an interesting point there. And then the final article I found was the Bavarian Army and French civilians in the War of 1870 to 71, a cultural interpretation, in which Mark Stoneman explores the Bavarian Army's experiences during the Franco-Prussian War. He focuses on mostly personal narratives of Bavarian soldiers to demonstrate that although they treated civilians fairly well if they cooperated with them, they were not above harsh retaliation measures for any who resisted, summarily executing civilians or those who shot at them, burning homes, and so they could be quite harsh at times. Excesses occurred as Bavarians saw French guerrillas everywhere. They came to view everyone as a guerrilla, and so hostages were taken as well. And this was in contrast to a humane treatment of French women and children. And much of this harsh response was chalked up to military necessity, which used to justify it. And Stoneman concludes that their experiences demonstrate that although the war could be harsh, they've maintained a set of values which they saw as essential to the conduct of war. And so this military necessity was an interesting facet of this article as well. Thank you.